This is Pivot Out Loud, stories about education and life in a world turned sideways. I'm Lori Huff.
A longing to do more for Kenya overwhelmed me, leaving a hole in my chest. Would donors continue to support a closed school? What about the dropouts? Those children sent out by reckless caregivers to earn a wage, or sell moonshine, endure unchecked abusers, or pedophilia? The disenfranchised boys driven to the streets where they smoke glue to escape.
When I first read Akinyi Williams' essay, it was easy to feel like I was in Kenya, riding with her in the car with her dad, watching the second graders singing and dancing outside her school, where Mama was sitting under a shady neem tree. But those images are in sharp contrast to the challenges she faced as the founder of schools that also supply children's basic needs like food and safety. When COVID hit, there were few infrastructures in place for her students, and Akinyi had to figure out how to keep the schools open. This is Pivot Out Loud, and I'm your host, Lori Huff.
A brisk breeze blustered into the back seat as I cranked the mechanical window down vociferously. The 2 day journey I had just concluded from Minnesota to Kenya's Kisumu International Airport was forgotten. My father, in the front seat, muttered something about heavy rains and the crop that was bound to be bountiful this year. Children splashed in puddles outside the Nyawita slums in where we were driving past on our left. The vaguely visible train tracks that ran along the road in disrepair were the only vestige of a seemingly prosperous past. Piles of garbage were strewn around from the slum dwellers who had nowhere to dispose of their waste. The train has not come to Kisumu for a long time, my father lamented, slightly discomfited. One of the children peeled away, pulled down his tattered shorts, and squatted to relieve himself on the tracks. He swiftly pulled them up and scuttered along to catch up to the rest, who were keen to get away from their smelly friend. They disappeared into the shanties. Down the road, men were washing their Boda Boda taxis in a large muddy pool, ridding their scooters of the thick grime. Across them were cattle, necks stooped low, lapping while littering as their herder whistled, frustrated, lashing their backs with long sticks, hustling the straying heifers to rejoin the flock. Soon, a uniformed guard pulled open the gates at a Rise and Shine Community Academy. We were greeted by second graders singing and dancing. The sun beat down on the backs of the dancers, jigging in a trance, yielding to the drums, sweat glistening and streaming down their brows, oblivious of the dust provoked by their pounding feet. Onlookers clapped and cheering them on. Tears flowed as I hugged the kids, the teachers, staff, and Mama, sitting under a shady neem tree. 14 years ago, with 7 children, we turned one of Mama's bedrooms into a daycare center. Today, we run 2 schools in Kisumu town and in Nyamila Rural Township, an hour away. We have graduated 3,000 students, pre K to fourth grade, 300 annually. They were largely from the surrounding slums. Thanks to donation from Hope for the Child, a Minnesota based nonprofit I had established, tuition was largely free. Hope for the Child's mission is simple: provide access to quality education to marginalized children, to alleviate poverty, and promote advocacy. We remove barriers to access by feeding them, providing basic health and sanitation such as vaccines, running water, and toilets to prevent disease spread. Secondly, we promote safety and wellness. 2 teachers are sponsored annually to training in early childhood development. We were impacting lives. I was humbled. Well, this was October 2019, before COVID 19. Paltry government assistance after the schools shut down in mid March 2020 was sobering. Minnesota, where I lived, had already switched to distance learning, and I was a kindergarten teacher to my 5 year old at home. In Kenya, however, there was no infrastructure to support this or any type of distance learning for the masses effectively. Teachers lamented that government radio and television programs undermined feedback and exchange, critical rudiments for learning. Television needs electricity. Learning packets developed by the Ministry of Education were cost prohibitive to print and disseminate. Teachers feared for their lives in the face of police brutality during the draconian lockdown and dreaded contracting the virus if we started an outreach program. We prioritized nutrition, then safety and wellness, and learning last. Basics such as maize, beans, avocados, or yams procured from our school farm incentivized caregivers to pick up free rations and learning packets at the school 3 times a week. A bonus if they brought the child in. Completed packets were returned in exchange for new material and replenished rations. Unfortunately, we could not track the children who had been sent away by their caregivers to rural homes to live with surviving grandparents and alleviate hardship, at least until September, when schools would reopen. Hopes turned dire when the Ministry of Education announced early July that schools would remain closed till January 2021, and all students would be held back to restart their current grade. Education was abandoned. Any future investment plans in infrastructure, cell phone towers, electricity, and subsidized data packages did nothing to assuage the burden of delivering the education and nutrition desperately needed today. This class war meant winners would be those in the upper echelons of the economic pyramid or persons with pure grit to prioritize learning for their children. You see, Mama Kambua, a 23-year-old single mother of four, all under the age of 7, lives in Nyawita. With schools closed, the lockdown and the layoff, feeding the kids daily was a struggle she accomplished by any means necessary. Pregnant at age 15, she dropped out of school herself. She did not know where her kids were most of the time, and she had no time to pick up packages. She felt alone, overwhelmed, and out of options. Wiping her sweaty, tear stained face with shaky fingers, she sank into a chair and whispered a prayer for her children's safety, wherever they were. She will send them to grandmother's in the morning. Mama Otenga is a 32-year-old. Her husband, a manager at a marketing firm, makes enough for her to stay home in a nicer side of town. For an additional fee to the school, she streams classes online for their kindergartner and second grader. She has even hired help to do household chores and private tutoring while she runs errands. The impact of the virus for these two families is distinctly different. In January 2021, impending implications to pedagogy in the classrooms to bridge the gap and meet the learning needs and objectives of the dissimilar students justifiably is certain to be a point of contention. That is, if Mama Kambua's children return. The window purred as it slithered down my car door, letting an autumn breeze in, its chilly feel portending the Minnesota winter. The road wound into a beautiful backdrop of trees, rich chestnut trunks with deep, rustic red leaves that seemed ablaze at the tops, burning orange and yellow hues. I turned into my driveway and stopped the car. The garage door slowly opened, revealing no fanfare, no teachers, no drummers, nor dancers. And Mama was not sitting under the crabapple tree in front of my house. The freshly mowed grass in the serene suburb that I called home looked pristine. A longing to do more for Kenya overwhelmed me, leaving a hole in my chest. Would donors continue to support a closed school? What about the dropouts? Those children sent out by reckless caregivers to earn a wage, or sell moonshine, endure unchecked abusers, or pedophilia. The disenfranchised boys driven to the streets where they smoke glue to escape. What about their pangs of insatiable hunger? Slumped over the steering wheel, I said a prayer and wept for a while. I pondered ways to keep everyone on payroll. Layoffs would cause hardship. Perhaps the staff would be farmhands. Teachers would be evangelists, safely spreading COVID 19 education, while Mama, a missionary, and the school, an altruistic sanctuary for the neighborhood. Irresolute, I felt a quiet knowing. Someday, God will help us make sense of the mess, I thought, pulling into my garage. Yes, everything was going to be all right.
Akinyi hoped that things would be sorted out, even though there were few answers about how the children at her schools in Kenya would continue to learn or how her staff would continue to get paid. I had to know what happened after Akinyi shared her essay with us.
Well, what has happened is there's a couple of forces that are impacting the way we are doing learning today at school. There's those forces externally outside of the school that are forcing us to do things. And we can talk about a couple of them. The first one is like the government. The government since then came up with an idea called community based learning, a community based way in which they can get students to go out to the community, into churches, into whatever building you can get and learn. Well, what happened is the community based learning approach, as much as it sounded good in the beginning, it was quickly shut down. And the folks who shut it down were the parents and the teachers. They complained because there was no planning on the ground. They wanted us to just talk to the churches, talk to whatever community association you can find, and organize yourselves to learn. Well, this wasn't going to happen. Another challenge was they brought out these radio and TV to kind of assist with that. Well, as we know, there's no electricity for most people, especially our target type of students. And there's no TV access for the slums in the areas our students come from as well. So this was a big challenge. And then for us, there was no funding. We are run by donors here in Minnesota. Hope for the Child is a nonprofit based organization I started in Minnesota to fund the schools, but funding became limited to sustain this new kind of learning. So community based learning, as much as it was a good idea, they did not empower the teachers on the ground to execute against it. And then they didn't fund. So that wasn't very helpful. Another thing was the community itself. They were not prepared, they were scared. So they didn't want to be sending their children to these initiatives that they didn't quite understand. Another thing that has happened since is partnerships. We were kind of left on our own. So I reached out to different entities to see if we can partner. And one entity, Sagam Hospital, that we partnered with to help train our teachers on COVID 19 basic education. So, what we did is Sagam Hospital, I know the administrator, and so she came out along with her team and they trained the teachers on how to wear PPE, masks, gloves, how to keep safe, hand washing stations, what COVID is, how it gets passed around. So, they provided 1 day training for our teachers and that was great. And so they're going to be coming back every month to kind of check in and see how they're doing and to provide whatever assistance they can, like brochures and such like things. The industry in general, the teachers we have found are the biggest force in what has happened because even if the government comes out with something, if they're not supporting the teachers, it will never work. So we have this strain, Lori, between teachers accepting something. Particularly, what's interesting is since schools shut down in March, some of these teachers have gone out to start businesses. They've figured there's two types of teachers, Lori. There's the private teachers like ours in private school, then there's public teachers. Private teachers, schools that cannot sustain because they're not collecting tuition, the government said do not collect tuition. So private institutions don't have the money to pay the teachers. So they let a lot of those teachers go. But public teachers are still getting paid, right? So the private teachers, because they have to sustain themselves, the government has tried to put together a program called Kazi kwa Vijana to try and get the private school teachers engaged so that they can do businesses. And so I am struggling to retain my private teachers, and the only way I could do that was to pay them so that they stay, to make sure they stay on payroll. But they've started small businesses. Other private teachers have started small businesses selling secondhand clothes, doing groceries. And so it's a struggle to, if you bring together all teachers and say, teachers, let's come together and talk about how we can do something for ourselves. Well, the private teachers are very scattered. So there's no linear approach. There's no association for private teachers. But public school teachers are resisting government work because they want to do their own thing as well. So these are the external forces. We've talked about the government, how it's affecting our school, the community, how it's affecting our school, partnerships that we have had to create, and then the industry in general. And then now let's talk about the internal forces that have affected us since. Internally at Arise and Shine, the way the teachers are coping with this is just keeping busy. The first thing we did is we called the parents in to get ideas. We want to make sure that the parents are involved in what we do. We called them in, we sat them down, we said, okay, what do you want? Surprisingly, they said they want their children to remain engaged. And so we came up with a plan that would come in twice a week. We would provide them with masks, or if we didn't have any, we would tell them you have to come in with a mask. And with time, parents came in, they brought their kid. We had about 40 students come into the school per day on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then some other classes came in on Wednesdays and Fridays, and we'd make sure they don't, we have a certain limited population at the school. But interestingly, what happened is the sub chief of one of the slums that our kids come from, I don't know what she was looking for. I think one day she just showed up. And we suspect that what happened is she wanted some sort of a bribe, because she was hearing that we are running some sort of operation that she is not part of. And so she came in and to intimidate us. But we didn't really engage her. She just kind of came in and found that there was, nothing happening outside of the ordinary at the school, and she left. But our teachers were afraid. So internally, we continued. They come in. What's happening with time now is as parents kind of get tired, they send in their older siblings. And the biggest challenge we see there is transfer of learning. When you're teaching a parent how to teach their child at home, it's very challenging because they don't know pedagogy, they don't know how to teach. I'll give you an example. When they bring back their grades, because we send them home with packets, Lori, and then when they bring back these packets, sometimes we see mistakes, and then we know that something is not going down right. For example, a third grader in a written assignment, when they spell the word this, rather than spelling it THIS, they spell it HTIS. We know that there's two problems. Number one, the third grader is very behind. They're not reading appropriately, and then they're not spelling appropriately. And so for a third grader, this is very discouraging. And especially for me, when my daughter, my 6-year-old Tulani, who I had to do some distance learning here, now the start of their schools, she goes to school, I see the contrast. She knows how to spell this. She knows how to spell they, and some of those sight words that they do, they're well advanced. And there could be multiple different reasons for that. Poverty and social economic status, and English being her first language, my daughter's language versus the kids in Kenya. It's very interesting to see this. But our teachers are trying to overcome those challenges, making sure they have masks appropriately, trying to transfer learning is one of the biggest challenges. And then also we have our businesses. Some of our businesses, the farm that we run, Lori, we to make sure that we're supplying the food for the children. We have a food program where every day we provide free lunch. We give free snack to the kids because of the donor community here in Minnesota. that donates to the school. But this was impacted because now all of a sudden we had a lot of food and we didn't quite know how to distribute this food logistically to the kids. And so what we needed to do is become creative. And so as parents were coming in, the caregivers were coming in, we would give them the food. And that way we kept them engaged. Students coping is a big challenge because we can clearly see they're falling behind, especially like in the example I gave you, their reading is falling behind, but we're managing to cope. Some of the concerns I have are just the gaps in learning, Lori. After the announcements were made, the children who come from homes that have money, they were able to continue, through Zoom and other learning mechanisms, WhatsApp. They have internet, they continued learning, but our kids have fallen behind. That's one of the biggest concern I have, and the uncertainty. What the government has done now in the last 2 weeks, they've made an announcement. They said, okay, they're going to open fourth grade and eighth grade. America here, you would call it 12th grade, but there we call it Form 4. So fourth grade, primary school, eighth grade, primary school, and 12th grade, which is Form 4 in Kenya. They're opening this month. And the reason why is because of the exams. They feel like education as an institution is falling behind. So they're opening just these three grades and they're testing it out. So they have rolled out a test for these three grades to see, and they're administering those tests right now, assessments to see where the children are. So they started those assessments last week. And unfortunately, as you can probably predict, Lori, they're going to be varied. It's a class war. The children who have the resources are going to be far ahead, and the children who are poor, like our school children that we target, are going to be behind. Those are some of the things that have happened so far. So we're administering those assessments, and we're learning. And then they said they want distance learning. From a facilities perspective, the schools have been shut down, and we're preparing those facilities for reopening. Like we have two schools running, but we're starting a third. We can build our schools as we prepare to open. And so in our second location in the rural area, we've built 4 new classrooms since to prepare the facilities. We've put up desks, blackboards, books to prepare. And as the government has brought in this competency-based curriculum, we want to make sure that the learner is at the center. So we're trying to cope with that as well.
Were you able to meet payroll? You mentioned that at the end of your essay, you were in your driveway in Minnesota crying, worried about the future of your school, the future of your teachers, for your students.
A miracle happened out of the blue. A donor called and said, Akinyi, let's meet. And I had been trying to get a hold of this donor for over almost a year, and they did donate. And that donation was the largest we've seen in a while. And that donation that came in helped us through from March all the way until today. We did meet payroll. Others came through as well, miraculously. That's how we were able to build the 4 new classrooms in rural. We were able to buy desks. We were able to keep all the teachers on payroll. And we're able to provide the books that they're learning today with the resources they need through these donations. Miraculously, the donations came through.
Akinyi Williams, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Lori, for having us.
That was Akinyi Williams sharing how she pivoted when her schools in Kenya needed help. I'm Lori Huff, the editor of Ed Magazine and the host of Pivot Out Loud by the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Thank you for listening.